Hello everybody and welcome back to Creation Myths. I got a real quick one here. This is going to be pretty loose, kind of unscripted because I'm recording this on July 24th, 2026. Earlier today I watched this debate, or a bunch of this debate, which was, as I sit here, yesterday on July 23rd, 2026. And I've been going back and forth in the comments with this guy right here, Donnie Badinsky, because there's a paper that he incorrectly cited during this debate that he thinks proves his point when it comes to the mitochondrial time to most recent common ancestor. In other words, how far in the past did mitochondrial Eve actually exist? So he was throwing around this paper, and nobody understood what he was saying because he was referencing it incorrectly. He was naming an author of the paper, but not the first author of the paper. So it took a little while, afterwards to be like, oh, that's what happened. He's referencing the wrong paper, or he's referencing the paper incorrectly. So I was able to figure that out. But now in the comments, he seems to think that this paper, supports his position on the recency of the mitochondrial most recent common ancestor. So here's a comment, for example, and I'll just read the part that I highlighted here. It's Arnauditor, I don't know how to say that name, sorry, Arnauditor et al., that's the paper he thinks supports his position, examined 64,806 Icelanders across 2,548 maternal lineages, representing 116,663 mother-to-child transmissions and 8,199 detected mutations. This is exactly the kind of extensive pedigree evidence that contradicts your claim that our argument relies only on isolated, single-generation mother-child comparisons. So he obviously thinks that this study, which involves multi-generation pedigrees looking at the mutation rates in the mitochondrial DNA, if you utilize those mutation rates to calculate a mitochondrial time to most recent common ancestor, you get something in the young Earth timeline, 6,000, 6,500 years ago, right? That's what he's saying this paper accomplishes. So let's take a look at this paper specifically because it has all the data we need to actually do those calculations. So what we're going to do is look at the paper, which is this right here, and we're going to actually do the calculations step by step, very slowly, and show how the calculations in this paper actually conclusively disprove the young Earth timeline for the mitochondrial most recent common ancestor. And I'm going to walk through this really slowly because it sure seems like creationists think this paper supports their argument. And as we will see, it does not. And just to remind everybody up front, the argument that they are going to use this paper to support, or that they will try to use this paper to support, is the idea that the mitochondrial most recent common ancestor existed approximately 6,500 years ago, certainly within the last 10,000 years. That's the limit on their time frame. So here's the paper, The Rate and Nature of Mitochondrial DNA Mutations in Human Pedigrees. And we can jump to the supplemental data for the actual numbers that we need, because the numbers that we need are in a figure in the actual paper, but you can't actually read the actual numbers there. But if you go to the supplements, they're all there, which is exactly the right way to use the supplements, to just tables and tables and tables of raw data. So here is the very top of table S3, that's table supplementary 3, and it's this first line that matters. So under the region column, we're looking at all, which is to say the entire mitochondrial genome. And in this paper, that was 16,535 sequenced nucleotides. And then we can come all the way over here to the far right, and we see a mutation per base pair per year rate of 1.45 times 10 to the minus 7th power. In other words, that's how many mutations there are for every nucleotide in the mitochondrial DNA every year. So that's the number we can use given the amount of diversity we need in the entire mitochondrial genome, right? We're using the entire thing, not just a specific region of it. We can figure out, based on that rate, and how much diversity we need to explain, how long it would take to accumulate the required amount of divergence. So we're going to do this on Excel. We're going to do this together very slowly, walking through each calculation as we do it to show the creationists exactly how this paper disproves their hypothesis. So to start up top here, the average, or the maximum, rather, number of differences between the two most divergent Homo sapiens, right, humans, that we have sequenced, right? The maximum divergence that we see in the mitochondrial DNA is about 120 mutations. It's about 120 differences between those two most divergent people. So what you need to account for are 60 mutations in each of those lineages since the most recent common ancestor, right? You have your common ancestor, and then you have the split. And if those two people at the end of those branches differ by 120, you need to account for 60 mutations in each branch, assuming that there are going to be equal numbers of mutations in each branch. Now, that is a kind assumption for the creationists. We could assume it's, 80-40 or 90-30 or something, and then that becomes worse for the creationists because we have to explain more mutations in a specific lineage. So assuming it's equal in those two lineages is the most generous way to do this math for the creationists. Now, it's not exactly that simple, though, because that's for living humans. But we also have to account for Neanderthals, because in the young Earth model, Neanderthals are a post-flood population. And when you do that exact same math, you don't have to explain 60 mutations per lineage, because the Neanderthals are outside of the existing human variation. They're more divergent. You have to explain more mutations. So it's actually 117 mutations per lineage rather than 60. So we're going to do both numbers. And just keep in mind that it's the Neanderthal number that creationists have to deal with, even though, as we'll see, both numbers are outside of the young Earth timeline, and significantly so. So our third number here, this is our mutation rate from the table that I just showed you. And here we have the number of nucleotides also from the table. So the first thing we're going to calculate is the total number of mutations in the mitochondrial DNA per year, because we have the mutations per year per site, and we have the total number of sites. So we can just multiply this, and I'm going to do this in real time here. So we're going to say this is going to equal this, right, times this, and we get an overall mitochondrial mutation rate of approximately 0.00239. It doesn't be that precise. You call it 0.0024, whatever, that's fine. But that's our number of mutations per year for the entire mitochondrial genome. So we have this many mutations per year, and if we're going to exclude Neanderthals, we have to explain 60 total mutations. How long would it take to accumulate all that variation? Well, we can just do some math. We take 60, and we divide it by the per year number of mutations, and we get about 25,000 years for the time to most recent common ancestor, excluding Neanderthals. Then we do the same thing with Neanderthals, so we can write here, what's the time to most recent common ancestor, including that variation, which again, in the young Earth model, you have to include. We're going to divide that by our total number of mutations per year, and that gets us about 49,000 years to the mitochondrial most recent common ancestor if you include the required Neanderthal variation. So both of those numbers, 25,000 and 49,000, those are well outside the young Earth timeline. And there's one more wrinkle here that makes it even worse for the young Earth creationists. In this paper, the authors explicitly say there's a bunch of variation that we caught that you would lose due to selection if you were to survey over a longer period of time. That's not included in these numbers. So you're actually going to make these numbers significantly worse for the young Earth creationists if you include that additional factor that we all agree natural selection operates on the mitochondrial DNA. Nobody disagrees with that. The mitochondrial DNA is highly constrained, and over half of it is identical across all humans, indicating very strong purifying selection operating against mutations across that genome. So those are just the raw numbers doing the calculations in a very simplistic way. And they are, what is that? That's about 4 to 8 times the young Earth timeline. And that's before you include or account for subsequent slowdown of the substitution rate due to natural selection. And I just wanted to explain those numbers very slowly for our creationist friends so they can understand that the paper they think supports their argument actually directly refutes it. Thank you for watching. Please remember to do the algorithm-friendly things before you go. Like, subscribe, comment, share the video. Share the video with your creationist friends. See what they think. Join the channel to get immediate access to pre-recorded videos. And as always, don't get fooled.